thought to an encounter that you might review that actually has CPT or ICD-9 codes documented or included right in the note. Hi, Shannon DeConda here with NamUs, and yes, I do start off many conversations just that way. To be in here, it's a scary thing. So here's what I'm talking about. Usually they're EMR-produced notes, but I have an example here. This is an EMR-created note, and you can see here we have the CPT codes right here in the body of the note. At the end, but still they're in the body of the EMR-created note. So here's my question to you. What happens? We have a provider who documented a note. The provider assigns 99215. It's right at the end of the documentation, just like this one. It says 99215. The coder or auditor reviewed the note prior to the claim dropping, changed the code to a 99214 because the documentation did not support the 99215. The claim was sent to the insurance carrier. Insurance carrier receives the claim and says, "We would like to see the documentation of the encounter." They now receive the documentation of the encounter. The documentation clearly shows the provider documented, and within the documentation of the encounter, it says 99215. Oh, but wait a minute. Not only does it say 99215, it is signed, which is an authentication of the provider, which raises another question. Do we, as coders and auditors, have the authority to even change that code, since that code is included in the documentation, which is signed by the provider? That's a little bit different than it being on an encounter form, which is a billing record. This is actually included in documentation that is signed and attested to. Documentation is a legal record. It is signed and attested to. And for us to change that code without the provider creating an addendum, that may represent a little bit more complexity than changing an intended code. Now, this is going to require a little bit of involvement by your C-suite, by your compliance department. So I don't mean to raise red alarms, but I mean to raise red alarms. We've been doing this for years. And look, I don't see a problem with us, for the most part, modifying or doing coding validation. I understand that is a process. And if you have an internal policy that says our coders will review the documentation and the coding by the physician or the non-physician provider and modify the coding as needed based on the documentation, I think those policies are fine. And you are within what you need to be as a coder or auditor to append that. However, it is completely different when that code is within the documentation of the encounter that has been signed and attested to and is part of the legal medical record. I'm beginning to think that that legal medical record has to have an addendum done by the medical provider if the code is not correct. If the documentation is incorrect, it needs to be corrected. Because if I'm the carrier, I'm going to get the claim form that's going to have a 99214. Now I've requested the documentation, and I'm going to get the documentation and it says it's a 99215. Okay, which one's right? We have a discrepancy. We have a contradiction. What's correct? So here's my suggestion to you. You need to create a policy. You need to have some type of a corrective action here, or you need to go to your EMR vendor and you need to find out if there's a way to turn off that mechanism within your EMR of having the CPT ICD-10 codes printed on your documentation. So that's our take for today. I know that's a tough one, but it's certainly something that needs to be reviewed and considered within your organization. I hope this was helpful for you. Please leave your comments, and you always know how to get in touch with me if I can be of help. I hope you have a fabulous day. Thanks.